Welcome to Free Thought Matters. I'm Andrew Seidel, Director of Strategic Response for the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces this program. I'm sitting in for Annie Laurie Gaylor and Dan Barker. FFRF, with 32,000 members, is the nation's largest association of freethinkers, atheists, and agnostics, and works diligently as a state church watchdog to keep religion out of government. Join us or ask for a free sample of our newspaper, Free Thought Today, at ffrf.org. I am pleased to introduce our very special guests today, Dr. Andrew Whitehead and Dr. Samuel Perry, authors of the awesome book, Taking America Back for God, Christian Nationalism in the United States. Dr. Andrew Whitehead is a sociologist and was an associate professor at Clemson, but is starting at Indiana University this semester. Dr. Samuel Perry is a sociologist and associate professor at the University of Oklahoma and author of two other books, Addicted to Lust and Growing God's Family. Gentlemen, welcome to Free Thought Matters.
Thanks so much for having us.
So we're going to talk about Christian nationalism, which is just an amazing topic that I think so many people don't know enough about. And I want to get into definitions and the spectrum of Christian nationalism in a minute. But first, I want you to tell me why understanding Christian nationalism is so important to understanding basically everything that's going on in the United States right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that I think Sam and I came to realize over a couple of years as we started to use national surveys of Americans' responses, looking at different attitudes or behaviors that they had. And what we found over and over was that when we measured Christian nationalism, and again, like you said, we'll define it later, but it was not only a significant predictor of how Americans saw their social worlds, but it was routinely one of the most powerful predictors, even more so than their political views or even their religious behavior or beliefs. And so when we started to see that, we knew, okay, there's something really big and interesting going on here. And then I think over the course of years, we started to pull back the layers and we found some really interesting stuff.
So, I mean, essentially, you're telling us that this political ideology, this political theology, which we'll define in a second, it's influential. I mean, right now it is, from COVID to racism and white supremacy to the imagery on state flags. Christian nationalism it's guiding voters and shaping public policy in sort of this incestuous feedback loop that people aren't understanding because they aren't understanding what Christian nationalism is. Is that right?
Right. So, and I think one of the things, Andrew was hitting at this a little bit, I think not only is it a powerful predictor of all of these other really antisocial, negative, I think what we've all interpreted as pretty threatening ideologies and practices, it can't be reduced to any of the other things that it's related to. So I think as you were talking about, it's related to racism, but it's not just racism. And it's related to authoritarianism, but it's not just authoritarianism. It's related to all of it. It's related to xenophobia, but it's not just reducible to that. And so it's connected, and it connects all of these other negative ideologies in this powerful way that we felt like we needed to unpack some more.
Okay, so this is influential, it's powerful, it's an important thing, but what is it? I mean, how do you define Christian nationalism? I always like Justice Potter's joke, I know it when I see it, and that's totally fine for me and for FFRF. We're out there on the front lines fighting Christian nationalism. But if you're studying it, which is what you two are doing, how do you get at exactly what you are studying? How would you define Christian nationalism?
Yeah, so the way that we define Christian nationalism in the book, and the way that I like to understand it, is that it's a cultural framework. And so the way that you could think about that is it's like a lens through which people see and interpret their social worlds, and not only how they interpret their social worlds, but then make decisions in it. And it's tied to this underlying desire to see Christianity, and I'm sure that Sam and I will unpack this a little bit later, and you could almost put Christianity in quotes, but to see this version of Christianity privileged in the public sphere so that the United States, both in its national identity, its public policies, its sacred symbols, in all of those areas, this version of Christianity would be privileged and would have power over and above any other type of religion or non-religion.
And Sam, do you want to add to that at all? I mean, it's it's an identity in a way.
Yes, for sure. So I think it relates to personal identity in a way that is very close to like an ethnic identity. It primarily, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, I'm sure, but among white Americans especially, when they adhere to this ideology, this cultural framework we call Christian nationalism, for them it almost works like an ethnic identity. When you say Christian, it means people like me, people who have my cultural values and look like me and are probably, or not probably, born in the United States, as an indicator of you are in this group that I call my people. And so not only is it a cultural framework that shapes our values and beliefs and the way we see the world, but it provides this powerful identity of who is us and what should our nation be prioritizing and practicing.
Yes, I mean, so this is a fight for what it means to be an American. This is a fight for the American identity, and their argument is that to be an American is to be a Christian, and to be a Christian is to be an American. And Andrew, you just touched on this, but your research showed that Christian nationalism is not the same as Christian, that religion and Christian nationalism are different. And you got to unpack that for us. That's a crucial difference, I think.
Yeah, it really is. And it's something that we found over and over as we looked at a lot of different topics, kind of those hot button issues in the political and cultural sphere right now. And so it isn't synonymous with being religious. Now, many Americans who strongly embrace Christian nationalism are religious and they go to church a lot. But once we account for somebody's level of Christian nationalism, how strongly they embrace this and how much they kind of identify, as Sam said, with this kind of personal identity of who we are and what we're all about, we find that if you kind of compare people that are low on Christian nationalism and how often they attend church, if they attend church a lot, they tend to be more pro-social. They will fear religious or non-religious minorities less. They won't see them as a threat. They'll be more welcoming to immigrants or refugees. They'll be more open to common sense gun laws. Whereas if they're very high on Christian nationalism and embrace it really strongly, they tend to be much more opposed to gun control. They tend to be much more xenophobic or racist and all these different things. And so what we're trying to do is pull the thread here and show that it isn't just the religiosity that's kind of pushing Americans in this direction, but it's their embrace of Christian nationalism and this identity of this is what it means to be an American. You have to be white and Christian and all of these things. That's what's really pushing a lot of these attitudes and behaviors.
And just to piggyback on that, I think that one of the things that we'd love to see the book do as a bridge between two worlds, both secular and religious Americans, is we want to communicate to religious Americans that this doesn't have to be you we're talking about. This is because we get that question a lot. That's, hey, I'm religious. I think being a Christian is important to me. It's an important part of my identity. I want to vote my values and those kinds of things. And we're saying we got no problem with that. It's the problem of wanting to institutionalize this very particular kind of Christian identity in a way that excludes a growing number of American populations in a way that has historically been the case, and you want to reinstitutionalize that. And so for religious Americans, they really should take this as a challenge to say, be religious, but be religious in a way that is welcoming and tolerant and embraces democracy for all and not just a few.
I mean, I've given a lot of talks on Christian nationalism around the country too, and I have seen that response from devout audience members who are upset by being what they think is associated with this group. And I'm wondering, are you guys exposing something new? Is Christian nationalism something new? Is this a new identity, or is this something that are we failing in our understanding of American religion? Right? Or is there just this restructuring going on where this is something, just a new form of religion?
So historically, Christian nationalism has always been a part of, it's always been an element of certain American populations that wanted to tie mostly national and racial membership with Christian membership and all of these things together. And that really is what the thread that I think ties Christian nationalism throughout the ages is this wanting to merge all of these other identities of a particular political or ethnic tribe with Christian identity. And it happens to emerge during times of intense cultural conflict in the United States. And when there's a need for a group that's in power to justify their power because they feel like it's being threatened, what they want to do is they want to call upon this Christian identity and say, hey, are you fellow Christians going to let these populations take away what's ours? And that's exactly what you see right now, right? Like that's why Christian nationalism has emerged on the scene again, because there is the strong perception among white cultural conservatives that everything's being taken from us and we want to take that back. Hence the title of the book. It is, and we could have put God in quotes there, but taking America back for God is really taking America back for us and our group and our tribe.
Yeah, it really is this us versus them, isn't it?
Absolutely. Right.
So,
Yeah.
and this is the book, and the us is, in the book you lay out this spectrum, I guess, of Christian nationalism, with the us being at one end and maybe the them being everybody else. But you broke it down into 4 different categories. And Andrew, as I understand it, this was your innovation. Can you explain to us quickly how those different categories stack up and who they are and how big they are?
Yeah, for sure. So in our book and in a lot of our work, we ask Americans 6 different questions that have to do with how they view the United States and religion or Christianity and how close that relationship should be. And then when we add those scores together, we have a whole scale. And we thought for the book, it would be great to break this up into 4 distinct groups to kind of show that while there is variation on the scale, people are at, polar ends or somewhere in the middle. And so when we're talking about Christian nationalism, there are basically 4 types of people in the U.S. in their response to Christian nationalism. So we have rejectors, those that completely reject any notion that Christianity, or especially this form of Christianity, should be privileged in the public sphere and a part of American
I'm a proud
identity.
rejecter right here. That's me.
Right. Yeah. And then as we move further up the scale, you have resistors. And so these are Americans that, again, with the name, are resistant to this. They see a form of Christianity that could be useful, but to say that it should be privileged, they're uncomfortable with that. But their rejection isn't wholesale. Just across the mean on the other end, as we get, a stronger embrace of Christian nationalism, you have who we call accommodators. And so these are Americans who will say, Christianity played an important role in our history. It can do good things in society now, but they don't necessarily think that it should be privileged over and above all others, but they think that it should play a role. So they're accommodating of this idea of Christianity playing a big role in the U.S. And then finally, we have ambassadors. And ambassadors are those that strongly embrace Christian nationalism. They want to see a very tight relationship between what their view of Christianity is and the United States federal government at different levels, all the way down to local government, that religion and Christianity should be privileged. And so this group is about 20% of the population. The accommodators is a little over a third. And so if you put them together, over half of the U.S. population is at least accommodating or are ambassadors of Christian nationalism. Resistors are about a little over 20%, maybe close to 25%, and rejectors are a little over 20%. So they're just under 50% together. But altogether, this kind of spectrum of beliefs, we see that where people fall, it matters on how they're going to view a whole lot of different issues.
And we're going to talk about those issues when we get back. Real quick, one-word answers. Is Christian nationalism a threat to our pluralistic democratic society?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm talking with Andrew Whitehead and Sam Perry, authors, scholars, gentlemen. We will be back, and after the break, we're going to talk about Christian nationalism and race. I'm Andrew Seidel with Free Thought Matters, and now let's talk about Christian nationalism and race. We've talked about how Christian nationalism is an identity. Gentlemen, how much of that is about a white identity?
I think what we keep finding is that when Christian nationalism is embraced by white Americans in particular, it tends to mean something different than, say, when African Americans affirm the questions that Andrew described. So Andrew talked about these 6 questions that we give everybody. And we have found African Americans often embrace a form of this Christian nationalism, but it behaves almost completely different from the way it does among white Americans who affirm the same questions. And primarily that is because for white Americans who think about religion, or they think about Christianity and wanting to see Christianity institutionalized in the public sphere, they think a white version of that Christianity. It's racialized. They think people like me should be in power. People like me, my cultural preferences, my values should be reinforced. Whereas for African Americans, if they affirm those same questions, they're not envisioning a history where their group has been in power. And so what they tend to be apparently affirming when they affirm those questions about how the nation should advocate for Christian values or how religious symbols would be okay in public spaces, they're really thinking about a nation that has never lived up to its professing Christian identity. And so it ends up making them more progressive in a lot of ways. Whereas for white Americans, it seems to make them want to double down on authoritarian control, on xenophobia, on the exclusion of racial and ethnic minorities. And so we have found Christian nationalism is particularly pernicious among white Americans because of all that it means for them culturally.
So white Christian nationalism, really. And I'm going to read a passage from the book here, and I'm just going to, just so everybody can see, this is my super highlighted copy. You really should go get a copy of the book. Christian nationalism idealizes a mythic society in which real Americans, white, native-born, mostly Protestants, maintain control over access to society's social, cultural, and political institutions, and others remain in their proper place. It therefore seeks strong boundaries to separate us from them, preserving privilege for its rightful recipients, while equating racial and religious outsiders with criminality, violence, and inferiority. So again, I mean, we really see that this is about favoring a special class of white conservative Christians, and everybody else is second-class citizens.
Yeah, I think that's true. And so with what we wrote in the book, and then too elsewhere in there, and kind of come to understand, is that it really has to do with and through history, this type of, these words and how they would say we're a Christian nation, we need to follow God's plan. I mean, early on, as Sam said, that was completely racialized. It was whites in power saying that this is a Christian nation, enslaving or pushing Native Americans off of land, using those things to say this is why we should. And that has a history, and that history has residue that is still with us today. And so when people use those terms, it's a part of that history. It can't just be separated. And it really is about making sure that this society, the way it operates, the way it's structured, benefits a certain group of people over and above others, even though in our founding documents, the words that are used say freedom for all. We know that it was white landowning men. And so that history is still a part and with us today as we go on.
And you've done some fascinating work as things are changing. I mean, the Mississippi just voted to remove the Confederate symbol from their flag, but they also voted at the same time that they have to have "In God We Trust" on it. And you've shown with your research that that phrase is this Christian nationalist dog whistle for white Christian Americans.
Right. So they removed one explicitly racialized symbol for a more tacitly racialized symbol. One that for white Americans still means the same thing. It still means our people, our group that we want to see privileged. And so I think undeniably at this point in study after study that we're doing, looking at white Americans as opposed to African Americans who embrace this ideology, it means something completely different, and for white Americans, it means us.
And this was one of the Christian nationalism you've shown was one of the leading, most powerful predictors in the 2016 election, correct?
It sure was.
Okay, so we've got, to sum up, the 2016 election, our leading predictor on our views on race. What about COVID? That's something that's pretty big these days. How does Christian nationalism impact people's views about the pandemic, this lethal pandemic going around?
Right.
Go ahead, Sam.
It shapes it in a couple different ways. So we were able to collect some data in mid-May, some nationally representative data, and asking our Christian nationalism questions, but also asking questions about how you behaved during the pandemic, whether or not you socially distanced, whether or not you wore a mask, whether or not you frequented restaurants or went shopping for non-essentials, or went to large gatherings, and even whether or not you feel like the social distancing restrictions ought to be lifted and we ought to save the economy and just let the vulnerable fend for themselves. And we found that Christian nationalism, again, was this incredibly powerful predictor that people chose at the height of the pandemic not to socially distance, not to wear masks, to go to restaurants, to shop for non-essentials, to go to parties with more than 10 people. And it also shaped people's attitudes towards the lockdown restrictions. They felt like we ought to preserve liberty. We ought to protect the economy. We ought to, sacrifice the elderly if it meant saving the economy. So
unbelievable.
No, I mean, legitimate, I guess, is absolutely what they affirm. And so, unfortunately, again, we found Christian nationalism to be this very strong predictor of some pretty negative attitudes. But I will say again, we keep on finding this pattern with religiosity. So once we account for Christian nationalism, being more religious didn't necessarily make you more likely to behave irresponsibly. And in a lot of ways, it predicted the opposite. People who were more religious after we accounted for Christian nationalism were more likely to socially distance, to wear masks, to do what you were supposed to do. And so it's Christian nationalism, not necessarily being religious per se.
So again, you're seeing that dichotomy again in this research too. Now, elections, race, the pandemic. So Christian nationalism's a leading predictor. I think people probably can guess on things like LGBTQ rights, reproductive rights, abortion. But let's explore just briefly some other things that they may not be so clear on. What about the Second Amendment?
Yeah, we found that it is a leading predictor of wanting to oppose any sort of federal gun control legislation. So here again, their view of the Constitution being, divinely ordained, and so the Second Amendment is from God, the Christian God, saying you have a right to bear arms. And then two, they see, gun control or even violence isn't going to be reduced by fewer guns. It's only going to be reduced by restoring, as they see, the moral fabric of our nation. So getting people to accept Jesus or to at least become Christian one-to-one, that's the only way that we're going to take care of violence or gun violence rather than any sort of federal restrictions on guns.
What about something like immigration? I think I know where this would be, but can you tell, does it predict views on immigration?
Yeah, I would say if there's anything that Christian nationalism, especially among white Americans, is strongly related to, it's powerfully related to all of these things, of course. But I would say it's immigration is almost like the flip side of the coin, right? To say that this is a Christian nation is to say it's our nation, is to say it's not your nation, right? And you have no business being here. And so somebody being a strong affirmer of Christian nationalism, it's almost a redundancy to say that they are strongly xenophobic and fearful of immigration in all forms, whether that's Mexican Americans or whether that is Muslim Americans, anybody who is not white, brown-skinned, if you're of another religion, even worse.
Yeah, and just to piggyback real quick, we can even look at Christian refugees and any sort of refugee from another nation, whether it's even in their same religious tradition, is viewed differently. And so it really is about being from here.
Wow. And who can forget Attorney General Jeff Sessions justifying the family separation policy at the border by citing the Bible, Romans 13. Gentlemen, this is an absolutely fascinating discussion, and we are not done. An extended version of this interview can be found by visiting the FFRF website, ffrf.org. But for now, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us about this really just crucial, omnipresent topic that affects absolutely everything right now. And thank you for joining us on Free Thought Matters, because free thought matters.